And a typical life estate is going to look like this. A gives a life estate to B for B's life. Okay? When B passes, the property goes to C. So say, for example, I give my mother a life estate in the property. By the way, she's going to be called a life tenant, is the legal term for her. I give her a life estate in my property. When she passes, it goes to my son. My son is going to be called the remainder person. And he's going to have a remainder interest in this property. That's a typical ordinary life estate. I give a life estate to my mother. She passes away. The property goes to my son. I can also do it this way. And this, again, is still an ordinary life estate. I can give the life estate to my mother. When she passes, it comes back to me. I am said to have a reversionary interest in that property. Okay? Both of those are ordinary life estates. Now, another type of life estate is going to be called per atre vi. And I'm told that's Latin for life of another. Per atre vi, a type of life estate. So in this case, I give a life estate to my sister for my mother's life. Okay? So I give a life estate to my sister, but it's based on my mother's life, the life of another. When my mother passes, it goes to my son. And again, my son would have a remainder interest there, or my daughter would have a remainder interest there. So I give a life estate to my sister, and I say to her, well, sis, as long as you take care of mom, you get to live in the house. But when mom passes away, then the property is going to go to my son. And that's called per atre vi, for the life of another. Now there's a fourth life estate that we can look at. And this time we're going to call it reserving a life estate. Now in this case, we're going to be say an elderly couple that has lived on the same road for the last 50 years. Now during that time, the population has grown up around us, and the 2-lane road that's in front of our house is now a 4-lane or a 6-lane. So our property has become very valuable. But we've lived there 50 years, and we want to stay there till we pass away. So what we do is this, is that we reserve a life estate, we keep a life estate, but we transfer to a developer, for example, the ownership of the property. Now, when you talk about transferring ownership, and I'm going to take a little detour here and then we'll come back to this. When you talk about transferring ownership, there's 3 things that we're going to talk about. We could talk about transferring possession of the property. We could talk about transferring equitable title to the property. And you say, well, Tom, what's equitable title? Well, basically, equitable title is the right to sell the property. And it's actually the reason why you're looking at this video. Because here in the United States, what we have said is that if we're going to, for lack of another word, mess with somebody's rights or their body, you have to have a license. So attorneys have to have a license. Your beautician has to have a license. Your barber has to have a license. Doctors, nurses. Well, where do you and I come in with that? Well, you and I come in at that when we have a buyer and seller sign a contract, we have actually transferred equitable title from the owner of the property to the buyer of the property, and that equitable title is the right to sell the property. Okay? So we talk about possession, we talk about equitable title, and we can talk about legal title. Now, where does that apply in our life estate here? When we reserved the life estate, we transferred to the developer here equitable title and legal title. The developer has the right to sell the property. The deed is in his name, but he doesn't have possession of the property. We have reserved the life estate. We've reserved possession of that property. So then when we pass, he's also going to get possession of the property. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about reserving a life estate. Now, we can also talk about then freehold estates or estates of tenancy, and that's going to be these leasehold estates here. And let's go to those and talk about those a little bit. But before we go to those, I want to mention one other life estate, a special kind. It's in your text there, but we should mention those. Those are going to be legal life estates. And some states recognize legal life estates, and they recognize what's called courtesy and dower. Courtesy is going to be the husband's life estate in the inheritable possessions or in the inheritable real estate of his wife, and then dower is going to be the wife's life estate in the inheritable real estate of her husband. And some states recognize that legal life estate. Now, there's one other estate that gets recognized also, and that's a homestead. And a homestead in most states is going to be where you live, where you sleep at night. And your homesteads typically reside in you. Wherever you are, that's where your homestead is going to be. But some states recognize homestead rights also, so it depends on your particular state, and you'll know that when you get to the state-specific portion of this exam cram. Now, let's go back and pick up these estates of tenancy. Let's look at these. We're going to call them leasehold estates. You should be familiar with these. You're going to see test questions on them. An estate for years is going to be a lease for a specific period of time. Now, normally we think of an estate for years. We'll think of a commercial 3-year lease or a 5-year lease or maybe a 10-year lease or maybe a land lease that's 40 years long. But don't let the word years deceive you there. An estate for years is just for a specific period of time. For example, if you go rent a motel room tonight and you say, I'm going to check out in the morning, that's an estate for years. It's for a specific period of time. Or maybe you rent a room for a week or a month or 6 months and then you're going to leave. That's an estate for years. Now, we also have what we call periodic estates. Now, an estate for years is a definite period of time. A periodic estate goes on forever. It's infinite. And a good example, of course, of a periodic estate is going to be a month-to-month lease. Well, when does a month-to-month lease end? It only ends if somebody gives a 30-day notice. Other than that, it just keeps repeating itself for years and years and months and months and months, okay? That's a periodic estate. Now, you could have month-to-month, but you could have week-to-week, or you could have bi-weekly. You could have every 3 weeks, I guess, whatever that is called. But as long as it's period to period to period, and then typically you have to give a 1-period notice to terminate that particular lease. We also have a tenancy at will. Now, a tenancy at will is maybe you let your mother-in-law live in your boathouse, okay? She can leave any time and you can throw her out at any time. That's a tenancy at will. Somebody comes to stay with you for a while. They're in a tenancy at will. They can leave when they want to. You can put them out when you want to. Then we talk about a tenancy at sufferance. Now, in a tenancy at sufferance, first one we might think of as a commercial lease. I have a 3-year estate for years, commercial lease. It runs 3 years. I'm still in that property at 3 years and 1 day. Now I have gone to a tenancy at sufferance. I've overstayed my lease. I'm at what we call a holdover tenant. That's a tenancy at sufferance. And in addition, most states define if the buyer is in the property before closing or the seller is in the property